Hello, welcome back to the final part of The Girl Who Could Fly, the last three chapters of today. Last time, Piper was trying to be in the mold contraption, and it succeeded, but we awakened Jasper's healing abilities, and so now Piper's all back together. But Conrad finally confessed that he was the one that betrayed the plan to Dr. Hellion, and now we get to see how everyone's going to react. So, here we go. Chapter 19. Piper's watery eyes crystallized to steely blue. Her face traveled from incomprehension to disbelief, and then finally settled into shock. You what? Conrad had spoken quietly, but it made no difference. Everyone heard and was silenced by the revelation. Several children felt as though they had been sucker punched in the gut. I told Dr. Hellion about the escape. You told Dr. Hellion about the escape? 1 second. The possibility that they'd been set up had never occurred to Piper. Yes, I told them everything. I'm sorry, Piper. I'm so sorry. You mean you were lying in wait for us the whole time? Wait, you mean you were lying in wait for us the whole time? Piper turned away. Her mind wrapped itself around the surprising new information. So we were caught because you ratted us out? Yes, that's what I'm trying to tell you. It was me. Conrad felt mild frustration at Piper's repetition of the facts. It was bad enough he did it. He didn't want it repeated over and over again. So the escape would have worked if you hadn't told? Piper acted like it was a 2 plus 2, and then went over the calculation again. Like I said, it's all my fault. They caught us because of me. He snapped, frustrated that Piper seemed to be having such a difficult time understanding such a simple concept. I told them everything, and what I'm trying to tell you is that I'm sorry. But what you're saying is that the escape would have worked? All right, this isn't a difficult one. Let's go over it again. Conrad had forgotten how frustrating Piper could be. He spoke slowly so she'd understand. I told them how to catch us. They did. I'm sorry. End of story. Piper launched herself at Conrad, and he braced for her blow. Instead, she threw her arms around him and ecstatically squeezed him and laughed out loud. Yee-haw! Piper jiggled Conrad in the embrace, and he wondered if the news had completely made her take leave of her senses. I thought I was wrong. I thought I couldn't trust my heart, but I can. I can. There's not a thing wrong with my heart. As Piper's laughter grew, Conrad became increasingly furious. It quickly got to the point where he couldn't take a second more of it. Stop it! Stop it! Conrad pulled Piper away from him. What is wrong with you? Don't you understand anything? I betrayed you. That is bad. Get that? I'm bad. Think you're the only fool who ever made a mistake? Piper looked at Conrad as if he was crazy. Psh! Talk about delusions of grandeur. I even get up in the morning. Heck, I've made even more than that before I can even get up in the morning. You can't learn nothing worth knowing without making a few mistakes first. Conrad wanted to argue, but then his face broke into a grin and his eyes grew strangely moist, and he didn't know whether to hug or slug Piper. He knew without a doubt, though, that she was the most infuriating person he'd ever met. Conrad, we gotta get out of here. Smitty was dancing back and forth between his 2 feet. All at once, everyone remembered what was at stake. Nurse Tolls almost got all the papers together. Yeah, let's go! Go now! Myrtle was practically jumping out of her skin. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Piper saw the diagram on the board and the children's expectant faces. We're getting out, Piper, Conrad explained. All of us, just like you wanted, right now. Piper silently walked up to the board, looking at the diagrams. We'll be out before sunset, and we'll all do our dreams, just like you told us we would. It's all because of you, Piper. It was your idea in the first place. Piper shook her head. No, it won't work. Picking up a cloth, Piper erased the plans from the board. Throwing the cloth to the ground, Piper moved to the window overlooking the atrium. As precious seconds slipped by, Piper thought. Escape isn't the answer, Piper finally declared with finality. I've got a better idea. At long last, Nurse Toll collected the remaining stray papers belonging to Boris's file and put them all back in order. Anytime there was a new inmate, there was double the normal work and triple the worries. The first 24 hours were always the most dangerous, too. He hoped for the 100th time that Boris wasn't going to have a personality conflict with Kimber. They were both two tough cookies and could potentially do a lot of damage to each other. At the science room, Nurse Toll checked the window on on the door to the class. Surprisingly, Professor Mumblebee was sitting at his desk in an entirely empty room. Nurse Toll knocked smartly on the door. When he received no response, he opened it. Professor? Nurse Toll waited, but Professor Mumblebee didn't respond, didn't turn around. Professor, are you all right? No response again. Nurse Toll's internal warning system lit up like a Christmas tree, and he strode forward and rounded the desk to discover that Professor Mumblebee had been bound and gagged and was furiously fighting against his restraints. Professor Mumblebee barked from beneath the gag, pointing at the door. Nurse Toll's eyes went wide and spun around to find Kimber, Lily, and Boris standing behind the door. Kimber closed the door with a bang. You're all in for a world of hurt when Dr. Hellion finds out about this, Nurse Toll seethed. We don't think so. Even now, Lily was the picture of sweet innocence. Well, I know so, Nurse Toll was furious. You'll sit yourselves down now and wait here. No. What did you say to me, Kimber? I said no, and you don't get to tell us what to do anymore. Nurse Toll lunged forward, but Lily telekinetically lifted him into the air and kept him safely out of reach. As he dangled several feet above the ground, Nurse Toll struggled to grab at the kids. You don't look so tough anymore, Nurse Toll. You better put me down. I'll see to it you get what's coming to you. And we'll see you get what's coming to you, Kimber sent approximately 50,000 volt arm. Ah! His shoes? Boris asked. Not only had he been scooped out of Moscow earlier that day and had taken to a strange and hidden place, but now he was involved with these kids whom he'd never seen before. None of which mattered to Boris, though, because he discovered his destiny the moment he set eyes on Lily Yakimoto. She was the love of his life, he instantly decided, and he'd do anything her little red button mouth told him to do. Yes, Lily nodded, finding Boris's attention entirely appropriate. As far as Lily was concerned, everyone should be her willing servant, and that went double for boys. Boris lumbered to Nurse Toll's feet. What you doing back there, boy? You leave me be. Don't be doing that now. Nurse Toll wiggled in the air, but Boris effortlessly got hold of his shoes. Hey! With one touch, the leather tightened and hardened and then turned to stone. The weight of the stone shoes dragged Nurse Toll out of the air and to the ground with a thud. Oomph! Nurse Toll recovered. Once again, he lunged forward at Kimber, who was standing closest to him. The stone shoes encasing his feet weighed more than 50 pounds per foot and led him firmly to the floor. Instead of reaching Kimber, Nurse Toll fell flat on his face. I told you were going to get what was coming to you. Kimber gave him a helping of her voltage. Come in, Dr. Hellion responded absent-mindedly to the knock on her door. Agent was due to present the security reports, and as usual, he was right on time. She'd had a hectic day, but the intake numbers were way down, which indicated that there was a growing trend of fewer and fewer indecencies of abnormality. Little by little, Dr. Hellion's methods were proving themselves to be successful. The day was fast approaching when abnormality would be completely obliterated from the population. You can leave the report on my desk, Agent. Dr. Hellion didn't look up. I'll also need to revise security protocols for level 13 in respect to the new inmate. Dr. Hellion, it's time for you to leave, Piper stated it simply as though it was obvious. Dr. Hellion's head snapped up from her work to discover Piper McLeod and Conrad Harrington standing before her desk. Had Dr. Hellion been able to feel anything, she would have felt surprise and horror. As she wasn't bothered by such emotions, she calmly leaned back in her chair and selected her helpful expression while taking everything in. The fact that Piper was completely healed and walking, that Piper and Conrad were together, and that Daisy was restraining Agent in a chair in the adjoining waiting room. Is there something that I can help you with? You're gonna have to leave now. We don't want you here anymore. The smile broke on Dr. Hellion's face. She struggled to keep it in place. Pardon me, Piper? What did you say? Please leave. Piper's words literally made no sense to Letitia Hellion, like she was speaking a strange foreign language. Dr. Hellion couched the situation in terms she could comprehend. I suppose you are trying to escape again. It won't work, and even if it does, there's no place for you to go once you get out. Yeah, we figured that one out too. Fact is, we're tired of hiding and we don't want to run. So we're not going to escape. We're going to stay right here. You have to leave instead. What? Dr. Hellion's mind traveled over the idea like the fingers of a pianist on the keys of a piano. The notes started to form a song, and the song Letitia Hellion was hearing had the same effect as hearing nails on the chalkboard. They weren't going to escape? But of course, they must want to escape. All of her preparation and planning and security had been geared toward preventing an escape. Never had it crossed her mind that they would revolt. She breathed the words. You're revolting? That's a real fancy way of putting it. I didn't think of it like that, but now that you mention it, yep, that's exactly what we're doing. Dr. Hellion held tightly to her self-control, unaware that she was pumping air in and out of her chest at an alarming rate. It's not possible. I can't. Dr. Hellion reached for the thoughts going through her head, but could not actually grasp any of them. The thing is, she said finally, there's something you should know. She was buying time. You're so lucky, and you don't even know it. Conrad looked at Dr. Hellion like she was crazy. He was interested to see where she was going to. You probably don't know this, but I had a brother, Johnny. My parents called him. He was much younger than my sister Sarah and I were, and there was something about him that was different. Not like other babies. My parents said he was special. Letitia Hellion babbled. She hadn't thought about Johnny in years. She couldn't control his bubbling up, and she didn't like it. You see, when he developed more and more of his specialness, when his abnormality grew, my parents encouraged it. Fools. After the incident, I tried to explain that Johnny had a problem and needed help, but they wouldn't listen to me. They told me that I didn't understand and that it was good. They said he was an example for me, so they encouraged him even more, and this, of course, made the problem grow worse. Piper watched as Dr. Hellion's face flushed and was genuinely moved by what the memory seemed to be doing inside of Dr. Hellion. Then, one day, I realized that if Johnny didn't get help, his specialness was going to hurt someone, like Sarah had been hurt. My parents, they didn't see things the way I did, and I knew they weren't going to stop him, so I was forced to. I called the authorities, and later that day, Johnny was taken away. My parents never thanked me, but I was the only one who could see that Johnny needed help, and so I gave him what he needed. Just like I can help you to overcome this terrible affliction that you both have. Don't you know how much happier you will be without it? Do you want to hurt those you love? I can help you. But Dr. Hellion, we don't want your help. We sure as heck didn't ask for it. Dr. Hellion shook her head, and a heavy silence hung in the room. Dr. Hellion, you can go quietly now, or we'll call Daisy in. Those are the only two choices you have. Conrad battled Dr. Hellion with a firm gaze. Letitia Hellion fished between Conrad and Piper and found that she had been completely unable to hook them. The most powerful weapon at her disposal was making the children feel helpless, so they would reject their gifts. Without that, the residents of the 13th level were uncontainable and uncontrollable, and working together, there wasn't anything anyone could do to stop them. Had they been trying to escape, Dr. Hellion could have potentially managed to receive a reasonable resistance, but ultimately, even then, they would likely prevail. But a revolt? That was a scenario that had never been considered. It was an idea outside of the box, and it was her undoing. Dr. Hellion stood up, but couldn't manage to select an expression off of her menu to wrap her face in. She had somehow shrunken in the course of the last few minutes, and, gathering herself up, she started to shake as she left her office. Daisy met her at the door. This way. Daisy pointed down the hall and followed behind Dr. Hellion, watching her every move. Conrad and Piper stood in Dr. Hellion's office and looked at each other. Piper's face began to glow. We did it, she grinned. Almost, Conrad warned. He didn't want to get ahead of himself. There were still several key steps that had to be taken before the facility would be completely secured. I knew it. In Piper's mind, victory was already achieved. And you were right, Conrad smiled. Piper's optimism was infectious, and he wasn't going to take away a moment of her happiness. Moving to sit at Dr. Hellion's desk, Conrad opened her top drawer and found exactly what he was looking for. He pulled out a blue ribbon, attached to which was a little wooden bird, and placed it in Piper's trembling hand. For Piper there were no words to express how she felt. She looked to Conrad, but he saved her from the effort of trying to speak. Just put it back where it belongs. Piper nodded, and Conrad helped her place the ribbon around her neck. The little wooden bird fell across her chest, resting against her heart, and at once the words came to her lips. I'm as light as a cloud, as free as a bird. I'm part of the sky, and I can fly. Piper's body tingled, and then her whole body ascended into the air. Conrad watched as she flew about the room, and then zipped out through the open window and into the atrium. I can fly! Piper called up and down the large well. She had had a long absence from flying. It wasn't exactly steady, but she made up for her wobbling with a blinding bliss. The air kissed her skin, her smile took over her face, and she flew faster and faster. Conrad paused in his plans, appreciating the miracle and beauty of Piper's flight. She was turning and twisting through the large atrium and skimmed across the sides of the building so that she was reflected in the glass. Not taking his eyes off of the spectacle of Piper McCloud flying, he made himself comfortable at Tisha Hellion's desk and picked up the phone. Yes, I'd like to speak to Senator Harrington, please. Conrad sat back and put his feet up on the desk. I'm sorry, but the senator is not taking calls right now. May I take a message? His father had yet another snotty assistant who was once again going to try to give him the runaround. Any other day they would have been successful, but not today. Please tell the senator that his son, Conrad, is calling. If he can't make time for me now, he will have the opportunity to see me on the 6 o'clock news, at which time I know he'll make the time to hear what I have to say. Less than 10 frenzied seconds later, Senator Harrington's careful voice was on the line. Hey, sport. Great to hear from you. Is Dr. Hellion there? No, father, she is not. Nor will Dr. Hellion ever be here again, because I'm here. Because now I'm here. And from now on, you'll be dealing with me. Piper zoomed past the experimental laboratory, where she could see Jasper placing his hands on the bent and broken gray giraffe. Moments later, a glow brighter than the sun streamed through the windows. Piper laughed out loud as she shielded her eyes from the blinding light. The giraffe's wattage reached every part of the facility, and for the agents already captured, it was yet another bizarre happening on this, the strangest day ever. The scientists and supported staff followed the children's demands without resistance and peacefully left their workstations and reported to makeshift detention centers. Only a few agents put up a struggle, and those unlucky fellows were welcomed by Smitty, Kimber, Lily, Boris, Daisy, and Myrtle, itching to hand out a taste of what they had to endure over the years. Much to Kimber's displeasure, by late evening there wasn't a single agent left to wrestle with, and her fun was all over. In less than 90 minutes flat, and with remarkable ease, Insane was officially under the control of the kids. Needless to say, their boundless joy was only slightly tempered with chagrin. Why had they waited so long and been so fearful when release had actually been accomplished so effortlessly? Making the decision was a whole lot harder than actually doing it. Smitty grinned, picking strawberry seeds out of his teeth. The seeds were celebrating their victory in the kitchen with a generous snack. Staging a revolt worked up a healthy appetite. It was soon unanimously decided that their first course of action would be to reach the surface and feel the sun upon their faces. Nayland and Ahmed immediately volunteered to clear the sky of clouds, and they all excitedly boarded the elevator for the journey to the surface. Sure wish Bella was here, Piper sadly shook her head. She'd have made a rainbow that stretched from here to Kingdom Come. The other kids nodded in agreement. There had been many casualties and things that just couldn't be put right, not even under Jasper's hands. Many creatures simply didn't have the strength after the long weeks and months of torture to reclaim their abilities. It tempered the triumph of the day with sadness and made the kids appreciate their good fortune all the more. Level 8, the computer voice reported, unperturbed by the going-ons of the day. Despite themselves, the kids felt anxious as they rose to the top. What if something unexpected went wrong again? Level 6. Piper, you think my parents will be happy to see me? A nervous quiver played with Lily's voice. Piper didn't want to lie. The truth was that some parents were going to be less than pleased, and Lily's very well might fall into that category. Will you be happy to see them? Lily thought before answering. Yes, she said finally. Very happy. Level 5. I'm going to run and never stop. Myrtle's face shone with excitement. Her remark seemed to unleash the others. I'm gonna look him I'm gonna look right up at the man in the moon and wave to him. I'm going to brew up some thunder showers, and then some sun, and then some wind. I'm going to shrink so small that I'll ride on the wind like a leaf. Giggles and laughter. Level 3. Piper looked at Conrad and he smiled. She smiled back. It was worth it. It was all worth it. There isn't a thing I would change, Piper thought. Level 2. No one moved. Level 1. Everyone held their breath. You are now exiting the facility. Have a nice day. I programmed her to say that, Conrad shrugged. It sounds more friendly, don't you think? Click. Slowly the doors retracted. The lobby was all steel walls and marble floors, as quiet and still as a church. Trembling, they moved forward to embrace their freedom. At the last and final door leading to their release through there was a At the last and final door leading to their release though, there was hesitation. You go first, Piper. Conrad stepped aside and reached for the door to give her first passage. You deserve it. If it weren't for you, none of us would be here. Sure you would. I just told you what you already knew. There wasn't nothing to that. There was if we didn't know we knew it, Violet assured her. Here goes. Conrad swung the door open wide. Standing before them, barring the way, and to the shock and horror of all, was none other than Letitia Hellion. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20. Letitia Hellion was not poised and definitely not pretty. Clutching a military-grade stun baton in her scratched and bleeding hands, she swung it violently back and forth. Her hair wildly uncoiled out of rigid pins, her clothes were dirty and ripped from a to-the-death struggle to escape her cell, and she sported an insane look in her rolling eyes that was anything but proud. You! Dr. Hellion advanced on Piper menacingly, swiping the baton erratically. Piper instinctively flew several feet into the air and dodged back and forth to avoid the electricity of the baton. You will return to your room where you belong. None of you are going anywhere. Get back. Get back. Letitia aimed at Jasper and sent electrical voltage pumping through him. Jasper fell to the floor, out cold. Ah! Lily yelped and jumped back. Myrtle took advantage of an opening and easily zipped past Letitia and out through the open doors. Ahmed and Nayland dodged, but Letitia was on a rampage, grabbing and hitting. Kids scattered like frightened mice. Kimber boldly charged forth to battle, but the electricity shooting from her fingers collided with the electricity from the baton, and she was short-circuited. In a burst of electrical fireworks, Kimber was thrown to the ground, singed and smoking. Conrad took advantage of the commotion to dart out. Daisy was grounded next, like a bull in a slaughterhouse. Piper dodged, but Letitia was supernaturally agile and seized hold of her ankle. You can't fly. Do you hear me? You are sick and you need help. I will help you. Letitia dug her feet into the ground to stop Piper from flying away. Piper fought back and propelled her way out of the shack, dragging Letitia's dead weight behind her. Please, Dr. Hellion, you gotta let me go. Piper lugged the fighting Dr. Hellion. Letitia yanked her down with a vengeance. I will save you, Piper McCloud, if it's the last thing I do. Piper pulled up. Letitia pulled down. Little by little, Piper towed Letitia Hellion off of the ground, and while the sky was the one place that Piper felt safe, it was also the only place where she could be unable to receive any help from the others who remained land-bound. Chasing after them in vain, Conrad, Myrtle, and Violet were rendered helpless spectators as Piper ascended out of reach. I won't ever let you go. I won't stop, ever. With a failing grasp, Letitia Hellion doggedly held on for all she was worth. Ah! Piper was being pulled apart like taffy. Win or lose, she was going to be several inches taller by the time this was done. Piper reached 6 yards above the ground, then 7, then 8. Letitia Hellion roared beneath her, a demon wrestling her back to the clutches of the dark underworld. Letitia's little finger slipped away from Piper's ankle, and she cursed it. The neighboring finger betrayed her next, and she damned it. A moment later, she could only count on the allegiance of her index finger and thumb to latch firmly around Piper's ankle. But then her loyalty was called into question. Piper reached ever upward, her eyes only for the sky. Her heart welled with the words, I am as light as a cloud, as free as a bird. I am part of the sky, and I can fly. 9 yards up. They were quickly reaching the breaking point. After 10 yards, the flagging resources of the exhausted index force of every emotion she'd ever repressed, which, it must be noted, was a ridiculously large amount. Some might say it was even uncalculable. Unleashed, the rejected and abandoned feelings chemically combusted in a cellular firestorm. It was so catastrophic that Letitia Hellion's mind and emotions, long-distant strangers, were welded back together. The abrupt reintroduction after such a complete and rigid dissociation was brutal, like a migraine of the DNA. No! Letitia Hellion directed her pain at Piper McLeod. Smitty saw it first, as he usually did. Conrad, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Conrad was indeed seeing. All of them were. It was shocking. It was terrible. It could almost not even be explained, and yet Conrad was somehow not surprised. Everything made sense now. Piper, watch out! Violet screamed. Piper glanced over her shoulder and was so stunned she did a double take. Oh, Bee, that's near about the prettiest thing I ever saw. At last, Piper had found what she'd always been looking for, and her first instinct was to stop dead. Dr. Letitia Hellion could fly. At that moment, Letitia was flying fast and with a burning fervor. It was a sight to behold. The look of unadulterated rage splashed across Letitia Hellion's face. Wait. The look of unadulterated rage splashed across Letitia Hellion's face woke Piper from her fantasy of impromptu flyers reunion and propelled her to beat a hasty getaway. Get back here! Letitia Hellion stayed on Piper's tail, getting ever closer. Dr. Hellion, please, just let me be! Piper twisted and turned. Their aerial acrobatics took them further and farther due north, leaving the shack and watching children far behind. Letitia Hellion flew like the wind, or a demon, depending upon your perspective. She was agile, too. It was obvious to Piper that she wasn't going to be able to outfly or outmaneuver her, that her only chance for escape was in the clouds. Unfortunately, flying through misty clouds is a dangerous proposition. With no visibility, a bird or an icy mountain could strike hard without warning, not to mention the fact that Dr. Hellion would undoubtedly follow Piper into the white soup, where she would lurk, ready to pounce. Piper took a sharp left and felt the mist of the cloud closing in around her. She changed her course several times and hovered a good long bit in what she hoped was the center of the cloud. Surrounded by white mist and quiet, Piper felt like she was suspended in a half-sleep state, waiting for a dream or perhaps a nightmare to hit her. Thankfully, the nightmare was not materializing, and after waiting even longer, Piper tentatively dropped below the cloud, checking for any sign of Dr. Hellion. What she discovered was an empty sky hanging over a vast expanse of icy cliffs far below. They had flown so far north that the terrain was both treacherous and beautiful. The sun shone off of the ice, making it sparkle like a million diamonds, and jagged cliffs proudly displayed open jaws of razor-sharp teeth. The sight took Piper's breath away and distracted her for a moment from the imminent danger she was in. Don't move! A wretched voice breathed in her ear. An iron grasp clamped down on her shoulder. Piper braced for the worst as Dr. Hellion spun her so that they were face to face. Dr. Hellion's hair had been completely blown out during her flight and was strangely wild and beautiful. Without thinking, Piper said the first thing that came into her mind. Dr. Hellion, could you teach me to fly like that? I bet you're the best flyer ever. Fastest, too. You didn't practice enough, Dr. Hellion snapped. Your turns are sloppy. Maybe if you showed me how, you won't accomplish anything until you keep your arms tightly in formation and your legs straight. Your left knee keeps bending out. Will you teach me to fly backward, too? Fly? Teach you to fly? Suddenly concern knitted Letitia's brow. You can't fly. It's not possible. But, Dr. Hellion, we're both flying, see? Jolted, Dr. Hellion looked around and for the first time noticed that she was hovering several hundred feet in the air. What's more, she found she liked it up there a lot. Yes, I can fly, she realized slowly. And I'm good at it, too. Damn good. Piper giggled, and suddenly Dr. Hellion did, too. The giggling grew. I don't know why I couldn't remember before, Dr. Hellion said between her giggles. It's fun, isn't it? Most fun I ever had, Piper agreed. When I was a girl, I used to wake up in the middle of the night just so I could fly through the stars. The memory tickled Letitia. But that was before Sarah and I. A jumble of memories surfaced all at once. Pop, pop, pop. Sarah was my younger sister. She couldn't fly, but she used to love watching me. Letitia paused, remembering even more. It was just so lonely in the sky. Do you know what I mean? Indeed, Piper knew exactly what Letitia meant. You yearn to share the joy of the sky when you are flying because it's so awesomely beautiful. My parents told me not to, but Sarah and I didn't listen. She wanted to see the world from up high as much as I wanted to show it to her, and so we snuck off, the two of us, and did it one day. Letitia was no longer aware of Piper as her memories ran away with her. Oh, what a day it was, too. Glorious, sunny, warm. There were only a few clouds in the sky, but it was like a picture postcard, beautiful. I hadn't ever carried anyone, and Sarah was heavier than I thought, much heavier. But we managed it, and it was everything we both thought it was going to be. Sarah kept pointing at things and shouting, "Look, Letty, look at the cloud! Letty, go faster, go faster!" Dr. Helen smiled as though she were flying with Sarah at that very moment. It was like seeing the sky for the first time again, too. I guess I'd been distracted in all the excitement because we were already over the canyon before I noticed that a strong wind had blown in, and then I saw the clouds, dark clouds, thunder clouds. The storm started like that. She snapped her fingers sharply, and Piper's eyes grew wide. The rain was so heavy, and I was so high off the ground. Sarah started to slip, and I grabbed her tightly. She was screaming. She was so scared. We both were. I tried to fly down as fast as I could, and I was holding her tightly, really tightly. Dr. Hellion held up her hand as though Sarah's hand was still in it. She was gone in an instant. Gone. She just slipped away. Dr. Hellion's hands clenched shut, empty. Piper was aghast. Letitia Hellion's chest heaved up and down from the terrible memories. Tears came to her eyes, and she looked into Piper's face helplessly. "I can't," she whispered. For the first time in as long as Letitia Hellion could remember, she showed someone her real face. What Piper saw there was fragile and vulnerable and scared. "Flying is wrong, Piper. I just can't do it." Instantaneously, Letitia Hellion dropped like a stone and free fell toward the earth. "Dr. Hellion!" Piper swooped downward, grabbing Letitia's arms and trying to hold her up. "What are you doing? You have to fly!" "It's not possible. Flying is wrong. Abnormal. Humans can't fly." Letitia tried to pry Piper's arms away, fighting her. They descended rapidly. "Please, Dr. Hellion, please! You're gonna fall! You gotta fly!" Piper was struggling to hold Dr. Hellion's weight, but she was too heavy and resisted any attempts Piper made. "I won't be like you. I'm not like you. Let go of me. Don't touch me." Dr. Hellion madly scratched and hit at Piper as they tumbled to the earth. In a last-ditch effort to hold Dr. Hellion up, Piper grabbed her right hand, and pulled with all of her might. Dr. Hellion pulled away with an even greater might. They stayed that way, suspended between the heavens and the earth for a short while. Dr. Hellion insistently struggling to be released, and Piper holding her. First, Dr. Hellion's little finger slipped out of Piper's grasp, then the finger next to it. "Dr. Hellion, please stay!" "Let go of me, Piper McCloud. I'm not like you. I can't fly." "But you can. I just saw you." No. Dr. Hellion violently shook her head, and her middle finger released itself from Piper's hold. "Let go of me." "But Dr. Hellion, I don't want to be alone up here. Just hold tight to me. Don't let go." Piper struggled toward Dr. Hellion while she struggled to think of a way to convince her to fly. "Dr. Hellion, please, I need you. Stay with me. Fly with me." Piper prayed every word, but in the end, there's no saving someone who won't be saved. When her two remaining fingers slid out of Piper's hand, Letitia Hellion fell without sound to the icy cliffs below, and Piper turned away, unable to watch. Once again, Piper McCloud was alone in a blue sky, defeated and triumphant in equal measure. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21, the last chapter. Row upon row of freshly plowed soil had been painstakingly planted already that day, and it pleased Joe that all signs were pointing to a good crop. When the snows fell that year, he and Betty would have more than enough to last the winter. At the house, Betty stepped onto the porch and rang the old bell. Joe then obediently put down his tools and led the old mare back to the barn for lunch. Pausing in the yard to wipe the dust from his homespun shirt, something unusual in the distance caught Joe's eye, so much so that he stood there for a while, watching it grow larger and larger. In the kitchen, Joe's transfixed form became a source of irritation to Betty, who had a ladies' auxiliary meeting that afternoon and a schedule that didn't allow for any dilly-dallying. In short order, she bustled to the door. "Mr. McCloud, lunch is on." Still Joe didn't move, and Betty followed his gaze and saw what he saw. Using her hand to shield the sun from her eyes, Betty shuffled next to Joe and watched with the same mute anticipation. At first it appeared to be nothing but a black dot, and then it grew to what could possibly be a bird, and then it grew further, until there was no mistaking the fact that their girl was returning home to them. From up high in the sky, the sight of familiar trees, rivers, and farmlands was a welcoming sight to Piper, filling her with gladness and peace. At last she was back where she belonged. Everything was exactly as it had been before she had left it. Indeed, as it always had been since her birth. It was as if no time had passed at all since Dr. Hellion had taken her away in the helicopter, and even her ma and pa were in exactly the same positions that she'd last seen them in. Gently descending, Piper set her feet down on the dirt at the edge of the yard and suddenly felt nervous. Were her ma and pa going to be sore at her for flying? Was she going to get in trouble and sent to her room? Maybe they hadn't missed her and didn't want her back at all. The fact that Betty and Joe stood stock still with expressionless faces did nothing to settle her ever-increasing nervousness. "I'm home," Piper spoke finally, kicking her toe into the dirt. Betty nodded. "I expect we can see that well enough." It had been a very long journey back, and for most of it Piper had practiced what she was going to say next. Taking a deep breath for courage, she began quickly. "You see, thing is that I fly and I like it, and I'm not going to stop. And I'm real sorry that it's not to your liking. Trouble is that there isn't anything else that makes sense to me like flying does." Piper paused before she got to the hard part and took another deep breath. "So, I don't want to hide it anymore, and I don't want to sneak off to the back field. Even if you won't like it, I'm not going to lie about it anymore, and I'm not going to do it on the sly, and, well, that's all I have to say." Betty sniffed. "Well, me and your pa ain't gonna lie to you none neither. We don't take to this flying much. It just ain't the way of things for young'uns to be gaddin' about in the sky like that." Betty looked like she was on the verge of launching into another lecture on the evils of flying, and with only the greatest effort did she manage to rein herself in. Like Piper, she took a deep breath. "But we had a good spell to think things over, and we figured as long as you do your chores and act as the good Lord would want, we'll just have to take you just as you was made, for Betty's and Joe's entire lives, and the lives of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, and so on, for as long as anyone in Lowland country could remember. On those 20 acres of land, things had always been the same. Yet today Betty and Joe had taken their very first tentative step toward something different. It was nothing short of earth-shattering, and no one could appreciate the incredible sacrifice more than Piper. Rushing forward, Piper threw herself into her ma's and pa's arms. "Ma, I missed you so much. Pa, I still got my bird, look." Betty and Joe held their daughter tight. "If it weren't the same without you, child." Joe held Piper tightly. "We're powerful happy to have you back." Betty didn't attend the ladies' auxiliary meeting that day, and after lunch Joe did not return to the fields. Instead, Betty and Joe sat down, and Piper talked and told them all about her adventures. She told them almost everything, and they listened with wonder and with fear, glad to have their girl safe and sound. Not once did Betty reprimand Piper for talking too much, so grateful were they to have her lively voice fill the house once more. Piper talked into the night, and Betty made her fried chicken and her prized apple pie for dinner, even though it wasn't Sunday. "I always knew it. The McLeods is flighty and unreliable," Millie Mae Miller declared at the ladies' auxiliary that afternoon, when Betty's absence was duly noted. It marked the only time in the 30 years since she first joined that Betty had failed to show up. "Can't say I didn't see it coming." A week after Piper's return, a new member quietly arrived to join the community of Lowland Country. It had always been Betty and Joe's plan to have a house full of young'uns, not to mention the fact that a man can't help but long for a son, so they welcomed Conrad into their home with open arms. Conrad wasn't quite what Joe might have expected a son to be. However, both Joe and Betty had started to develop a taste for things not being as they had always been on the farm. It had been at Piper's insistence that Conrad come and stay, and he had been extremely reticent. When he finally did arrive, Piper showed him around the place, overjoyed. "This is your room." Piper pulled Conrad into a small plain room next to the one she slept in. See here, look." See here, look." She threw open an old window overlooking green fields. "You've got a great view of the sunrise, and Ma put the new quilt on your bed, and Pa made this desk for you 'cause I told him that you like to sit and think up stuff." The room was simple and humble, which was why Conrad found himself surprised by the feelings of extreme gratitude and thankfulness. His parents had given him the best of everything, and yet it had always struck him as meaningless junk. Betty and Joe had given him next to nothing, but each item was bestowed with such care and consideration that it was almost painful for him to accept their generosity. From the moment he set foot on the farm, they opened their house and their arms to him, a virtual stranger with full hearts. Until Piper, Conrad had never met anyone who gave with such simple kindness, expecting absolutely nothing in return. In contrast, it was only with threats of a public scandal that Conrad had been able to get his father on the phone at all. Even then, Senator Harrington had not been pleased. "What is it, Conrad? I don't have time for this." He'd snapped when Conrad had called from Letitia Helling's office. "This is a courtesy call. This call is a courtesy, Father. I'm happy to go to the press first," Conrad fired back. Senator Harrington simmered down and found courtesy for his tone. "I'm listening." "We've taken over the facility. Dr. Hellion is no longer in charge. I'm going to expose what is going on here, and I have documentation that proves that you are not only aware of it, but supported it. By my calculation, a conservative estimate of the laws being broken by Dr. Hellion numbers close to 20, including murder." "Murder?" The senator's full attention was now focused on his son. "And you have aided and abetted Dr. Hellion, which makes you an accessory to the crime." Conrad knew that this could easily take down his entire family. His father's icy silence on the other end of the line only confirmed the weight of his threats. "What do you want?" "You'll use your connections and influence to get approval today for the facility to be under your authority. As soon as you have the authority, you'll turn it over to me. We'll be running it from now on, and you'll see to it that no one interferes with us or gets in our way." "Connie, that's impossible. I need to get approval from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Then do it. I'll expect confrontation by the end of the day." When his father had called back, Conrad didn't take his first call, or his second, or third, or even fourth. He waited until the messages became increasingly more urgent before finally picking up the phone. "It's done." Senator Harrington had used every favor, every influence, every means available to him by dint of his family, his position, and his wealth to pull off the impossible, just as Conrad knew he would. Unfortunately, there was a caveat, and one Conrad had not been expecting. "But," the senator let the word hang in the air. "But what?" Conrad prompted. "The deal comes off the table unless you agree to one condition." "You're in no position to negotiate with me, Father." "This is non-negotiable. You get everything you want on the condition that you never contact me or your mother again. We never want to hear from you or see you, and you can no longer use the Harrington name. You are no longer our son." "I see." Conrad's face crumpled, and he bit his lip to keep him from making a sound. "This hurts so much." "Father?" Conrad stopped himself, taking a deep breath. How was he going to beg his father to be his father? How was he to say of all things he wanted to say before he no longer had a father and effectively became an orphan? In the end, there were no words. "I agree." The minute the words were out of Conrad's mouth, the line went dead. The man who used to be his father had hung up, and Conrad entered a new life, where he was just plain Conrad and no longer Conrad Harrington III. Tucked up in a tiny room in lowland country, day by day, Conrad established himself in his new life. There he was expected to do chores every day and was served up 3 square meals of good country fare. He grew to like it. It was a good thing that Joe and Betty had taken their first tentative steps in accepting change, because Conrad pushed them to their limits and beyond. "You don't say," Joe shook his head, his brow furrowed. Conrad pointed to a detailed diagram of the 20 acres of land the McLeods owned. It included charts and graphs. "By planting an early wheat crop and then alternating with corn and barley, you can get three crops in one season per field. In addition, I have engineered this hybrid seed that produces 3 times the bounty and twice the weight. You'll be able to harvest the same crops as a 200-acre farm with no additional manpower." Joe shook his head in amazement. Holding up the seed that Conrad presented to him, he turned it over in his hand. "McLeods ain't never done that before." He considered Conrad's words, looking out over his fields, and shrugged. "Ain't no harm in trying it out, though, I guess." Conrad smiled, and Joe put his arm around him. Betty rang the bell for dinner, and they walked together through the field and across the farmyard to the house. Since Conrad had the house wired for high-speed internet, and built a supercomputer in the kitchen, mealtimes had become an adventure. Conrad and Joe entered the kitchen to find that Betty had been busy downloading recipes, and Moroccan food was on the menu for the evening. Concha, couscous and spiced lamb waited on the table, and Piper excitedly sipped her mint tea. Wash your hands, Conrad. Sit yourself down. Joe, or the kebabs will get cold. Betty busily passed around a plate of exotically spiced carrots and lentils. Wouldn't you know it, but Piper's got some news to tell, and I made her hold off so that we could all enjoy it. You'll never guess, Piper burst forth, unable to contain herself any longer. Smitty cracked that big case. He caught the guys with the virus bomb holed up in an old bank vault in the Times Square, so that virus can't hurt anyone now. They're they're making him a first-class detective, youngest one ever. Isn't that something? Betty sniffed and shook her head. Don't know what the world is coming to when folks is running around with a bit of virus in a bottle and threatening to make folks sick with it. Oof. I'm sure glad we don't get any of them here in lowland country. Smitty said that in New York they got more criminals than anywhere else, and he couldn't be happier about it. He said that there just aren't enough hours in the day for all he has to do. Like many of the kids, Smitty had the difficult task of balancing his schoolwork with his exciting new job. It wasn't easy, but he couldn't have been more fulfilled. Smitty was also one of the lucky ones whose parents welcomed him back with open arms. Smitty says that just the other night he went to Cirque du Soleil to see Kimber's show, and it was sold out, Piper continued. Folks can't get enough of her new act, and he says she's got more voltage in her fingertips than ever. Did Smitty apologize? Conrad asked between mouthfuls, as per usual. Smitty and Kimber were in the middle of one of their fights. This one started when Kimber caught Smitty yet again looking at her underwear, and she'd pumped 30,000 volts into his left leg. Smitty, of course, pleaded his innocence, but Kimber didn't believe a word of it. Well, Kimber says that she won't forget, but she'll forgive. Ahmed and Nayland got rid of that tropical storm that was turning into a hurricane off of Cape Canaveral, too. They say that now they have a hang of it, there's nothing to it, and they can't wait to try their hands at a tsunami. Anyway, Lily landed easy as pie. She told me that after the third or fourth time up to the moon, it's no different than going to the corner store. She took more pictures for me just the same. Oh, and Myrtle and Daisy faxed that report you wanted, Conrad. Piper pointed to a stack of papers on the counter. Conrad immediately rose from his seat, but Betty fixed a stern finger on him. Not till you finished up your supper, young man. You knows better than that by now. Smiling, Conrad sat down. He might be a super genius, but he knew better than to cross Betty McLeod when she got that look in her eye. Daisy says the new alligator, the one Violet brought back from the tomb in Egypt, got stuck when he was metamorphosizing between a snake and an alligator. He had the head of an alligator and the body of a snake, but was as mad as a hornet. Myrtle fetched Jasper at the Moscow Zoo, where he was healing a sick polar bear, and Jasper came right back and cured him. He said it was just a bad case of indigestion. Ever since Daisy and Myrtle had taken over running the Institute, things had changed drastically. It was decided that the Institute would no longer imprison any life form, but instead provide a safe haven only for those who required assistance or protection. It was also going to direct the vast equipment and research facilities at its disposal to the creation of scientific advances that would benefit all creatures, whether normal or not. Unfortunately, very few of the inhabitants could be immediately released back to their original homes, because they were simply too weak or damaged from Dr. Helling's ministrations. Conrad devised a program to wean the drugs out of their systems, while Daisy and Myrtle supervised the scientists, who were now tasked with rehabilitating the various creatures and retraining them in their talents. For many, the damage had been great, and it was going to be a slow process. Myrtle and Daisy, who were overseeing every step and reporting back to Conrad, were relentless in their efforts to save each and every one. Every time a rose reclaimed its bloom or a leaping turtle regained the spring in its depth, it was a great cause for celebration. Myrtle was, more often than not, the one who ran across the globe to deliver the healed plant or animal back to its home. She was also the one to complete weekly and then monthly checkups to make sure that it was flourishing back in its natural habitat. Conrad took a keen interest in every aspect of the daily reports and ensured that the true nature of the facility was being carefully concealed from the rest of the world. Before Conrad would even consider letting any of the kids leave Insane, he instructed them on the arts of discretion, much to Kimber's chagrin. I can do what I want. Who do you think you are, Dr. Hellion? Kimber snapped. No, I think I'm the person who is trying to stop someone like Dr. Hellion from catching us again. The fact of the matter is, Kimber, that we scare a lot of people. They don't know what to do with us, so all I'm asking you to do is give them an explanation that they can understand when you have to, and don't tell them about it when you don't. I'm not asking you to hide, I'm telling you not to flaunt it. Conrad had finally won them over, and when newspaper reporters pressed Kimber for details on the amazing special effects she used in her circus act, she smiled tightly and said, "No comment." Conrad had negotiated ironclad Conrad had negotiated ironclad employment agreements for the others that ensured their protection and privacy. It was an uneasy and potentially dangerous situation, and Conrad kept a close eye on them all to. Oh, wow, reading is struggling today. And Conrad kept a close eye on them all to make sure that no one was suddenly going to find themselves on the front page of New York Times or the top story on the 6 o'clock news. While much progress had been made, it was by no means a perfect solution. It was potentially fraught with peril. Indeed, it weighed heavily on Conrad's mind, and a few months later, when the kids all gathered at the farm for a little rest and relaxation, he made a point of watching them closely to see what progress they had made. As it turned out, he wasn't the only one. There is something that ain't right about all them kids, Millie May Miller confidently sniffed to the minister's wife. The 4th of July picnic was in full swing, and Millie May had cornered the poor woman under the trees. Have you ever seen the likes of it? She pointed her finger accusingly. The minister's wife nervously cleared her throat. True, they ain't from around these parts, but they're just children all the same, don't you think? Millie May was fit to be tied and squinted her eyes suspiciously. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something was definitely going on. Over a year ago, those fancy suit types from the Institute had explained to the folks of Lowland Country that Piper McLeod had played a trick on them, and that she couldn't fly at all. They had called it an optical illusion and said that they were going to take the naughty girl away for a while to teach her not to play such tricks. Millie May Miller wanted to make sure that Piper McLeod wasn't up to her old hijinks, because she, for one, wouldn't stand for it. With no real evidence, Millie May resorted to grasping at straws. Did I tell you that they wouldn't even give my Sally Sue the time of day? She spat. Sally Sue was standing next to him in line, and they didn't say so much as howdy do. Rude is what that is. Bad manners, I'm telling you. I ain't never seen the likes of it. Millie May crossed her arms in front of her chest. But they'll get what's coming to 'em. It's always the way. Millie May waited all day for the strange group of young uns under Betty and Joe McLeod's care to get what's coming to 'em. To no avail. When the baseball game was called to order, she licked her lips, certain that their just desserts would be quickly served up. The shouting, pushing, and pulling had the normal result of producing 2 team leaders, but that year there was a strange name in the roster. Rory Ray Miller and Conrad. It wasn't because Conrad could outthink, out-argue, or out-anything that he scared the bejesus out of everyone in Lowland Country. No, their fear was generated from reasons that they couldn't quite put their finger on, and which prompted them to cut the boy a wide berth. It was for that same reason that Conrad claimed the best draft pick, and was quick to snap up the best player in the bunch. Piper McLeod. Piper moved out of the waiting kids with her head held high and joined Conrad's team. Jimmy Joe, Rory Ray shouted. Lily Akimoto. Junie Jane. Abin Mustafa. Billy Bob. Like the rest of Lowland Country, Betty and Joe enjoyed the baseball game on the side of the hill, and perhaps cheered louder than any of the other parents. It was a joy for them to see Piper so happy and to have such good friends. They'd watched her all day, laughing and playing. She taught Violet to do the jig, and then the 2 girls had laughed so hard under the trees that their stomachs hurt. Pretty much they'd spent the whole day laughing so much that Violet had spilled strawberry ice cream down the front of her dress. This only made them laugh harder. Betty could see how much Piper had changed in the last year. Just the week before, Betty had suggested that Piper might like to attend the local school. To her surprise, Piper didn't think on it long before solemnly telling Betty that she had enough schooling for the time being, and wasn't much interested in going to school anymore. And that wasn't the only change. There were places and parts of Piper that she kept closed now, and things she didn't talk about. She was more thoughtful, and there were periods when she became very silent, like she was deeply grieving something that Betty could only guess at. Betty knew that Piper hadn't told her everything that had gone on at the Institute, and Betty guessed that there was now good reason for that, too. As a parent, she wanted to know everything, but some things are just too difficult to know. Betty was careful not to press Piper for information further than she was willing to volunteer, and took note of the fact that there was a knowledge and understanding that had grown in her child's eyes that spoke of wisdom. But most of the time, like today, Piper was just like she'd always been, which is to say that Piper was full of life and bursting to meet the challenges before her. Catch that ball, Piper! Billy Bob hit a doozy. The ball climbed and climbed. Piper shot Lily a meaningful glance, and Lily responded with a mischievous smile. Piper then held her baseball glove calmly above her head and waited for the ball to drop into it. To the startled eyes of the spectators, not to mention the opposing team, it did. Aw, man, Rory Ray sulked. His team threw their hats to the ground, and Junie Jane used a few choice words. Try as she might, Millie May couldn't actually point to a single thing that Piper or anyone else on her team was doing that was out of the ordinary. Sure, it was bad luck that every time someone on Rory Ray's team was up to the bat, they had blinding sunlight in their eyes or a suspicious wind roaring past. Not to mention the fact that there was one time that Piper McLeod seemed to linger a bit in the air a bit longer than most kids might when she caught a ball. And even Millie May had to admit that the girl could jump amazingly high. Of course, when Myrtle was running, Millie May did whisper that the girl was a ringer. There were other things that just irritated her, like the fact that the big girl Daisy kept breaking both the bat and the ball, and that every time Kimber hit the ball, it had a strange electrical charge on it that caused the unlikely person who caught it to immediately release it. And Conrad, well, even Millie May Miller knew her limits and wasn't about to take him on. As the sun began to set over lowland country, Betty and Joe rose to their feet and cheered loudly for the winning baseball team. For Piper, Conrad, and all the others, it was a victory, but not over the opposing team. It was the first time that they had played with the other children and had not been ostracized or fled from in fear. It was the first time that they had been accepted by their friends for what they were, while being able to strike some sort of balance, however uneasy, with the outside world. A triumph indeed. Betty and Joe packed the lot of them back to the farm after that. There was only so much scrutiny from Millie May that Betty's nerves could take. The rest of the day was spent away from all the prying eyes on the fields and pastures of the farm, where the games played were anything but normal. That night, Conrad found Piper quietly by herself on the roof of the house, enjoying a sky full of stars. It was a fun day. It was fun today, huh? For once, Conrad actually sounded his age. Piper smiled and nodded. You coming back inside? Violet said she could shrink smaller than a teacup, and Smitty bet Kimber $20 she couldn't. She can. I know, but Smitty and Kimber will get into a fight about it anyway, and that'll be hysterical. Conrad laughed. True. Sensing that there was something on Piper's mind, Conrad sat quietly next to her. Piper's eyes went back to the stars, and Conrad noticed that she had been covering her stomach with her hands as though she wasn't feeling well. When her hands came down to her lap, he was surprised to see the linen handkerchief embroidered with small bluebirds clutched between her fingers. Jay was here. Conrad was not asking a question. He just left. As he promised, Jay had come back for Piper and had returned her handkerchief to her. He was exactly the way Piper had remembered him too, harried with hair trigger nerves and no time for small talk. Jay wants to take us away from here. He says that it's still not safe and he has some vital information to share with us. Safe from what specifically? And what kind of information? Conrad had read Letitia Hellion's file on Jay. It was extensive on specifics, but bereft of essentials, such as any psychological analysis or background information, which would indicate what was driving Jay with such relentless and overwhelming passion. Until Conrad could learn more about this mysterious invisible man, he was extremely wary of Jay's motives, regardless of the fact that all indications pointed to his benevolence. Did he try to force you to leave with him? No, of course not. He said something about a place that was hidden. It's far away and it's secret. He said we'd belong there. Do you think we should go? Conrad's mind raced in every direction at once, analyzing the information from all conceivable angles. Piper was instantly sorry to see the carefree boyish quality vanish after emerging on Conrad's face over the last few weeks on the farm. It was replaced by a deathly seriousness and slight anxiety, which she knew all too well. This was not what Piper wanted at all. After all that they had been through, and all that they had accomplished, surely they deserved a small respite, and relax and appreciate their good fortune. And surely there would be time for planning and understanding, and for her to explain to him the many other things that Jay had told her. But sitting on the roof under the stars, after such a delicious day, was definitely not that time, Piper decided. Conrad? Mm-hmm. We did real good, huh? Hmm? Everything worked out. Everyone's real happy, and I mean, I know it's not perfect, but what's perfect, right? What are you trying to say? Remember how mean you were when we first met? Piper laughed, and Conrad smiled and tentatively relaxed. Boy, did you have boy, did you ever have everyone fooled, because you're about the nicest person I ever met. Conrad blushed. That got me to thinking how Dr. Hallion seemed nice but was actually mean. But then it turned out she was just real sad. Ever wonder why there's so many sad and scared people out there? I always wanted to teach people to fly, but I don't want to do that anymore. Flying's alright, but if I had the chance, I'd teach them to be happy instead. You know? You think you can teach someone to be happy? That was something Conrad had never thought about before. It relaxed him to consider the subject, and he leaned back against the shingles and shrugged. You got me there, Piper. I don't know. I bet you can. I wouldn't put anything past you, Piper McLeod. Piper smiled at Conrad and let herself slide off the roof. A moment later, she took to the night air, gliding upwards to the stars. The end! Woo! We did it! Yay! Woo! That was an adventure, and thank you so much for joining me with it. My voice doesn't feel too shot. Yeah! Like I said, I do have the second one, which is right here. The boy who knew everything. I can't see it very well, but so we could either continue reading, or like I said, they're also all on audiobook too. So I don't know, it sounds fun, but it's been a good time. And thank you so much for joining me. Um yeah, have a great day. Wear what you want to wear and just be yourself. There's my Disney statement for the day. You're right. The second book is very weird, but like I still liked it. I love you guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye.